What does it mean to play the changes? Whether it's Miles Davis on Freddie Freeloader, J.J. Johnson on Barbados, or Clifford Brown on Joy Spring. All three of these great solos illustrate the importance of connecting chord tones in melodic and novel ways. Today, we're going to talk about how you can build lines like these without the use of vocabulary or predetermined licks. All right, if you're someone who frequently tunes into the videos on this channel, you know that I love vocabulary. I think this is one of the best ways for us to digest the improvisational language. We listen to the masters, we learn what they did, we dissect their solos, pick out little nuggets of gold, move those for all 12 keys, try to apply them in our own playing, and then eventually we gain mastery over this language and can do something new based on that vocabulary sort of foundation that we have laid. But that doesn't mean that this is the only way to work on this and that there aren't other avenues that might help us grow as musicians. As always, if you want a little more support practicing some of this content, check me out over on Patreon. You can find the link down in the description. There's some good handout material. There's an extra practice session that goes along with every lesson I release here, and also some other etudes and things like that that I post every once in a while. So if you enjoy this content, want to check out some more stuff, head over there. I think you'll like the stuff that we've got going on there. It's a great practice tool to help you learn some of this stuff in a better way. So let's dig into things. I mentioned up top the importance of connecting chord tones in the right places, or what we could call chord tone timing. And for us, if we want to feel like we're really playing inside the changes, we want to have chord tones happening mostly on downbeats. Now, to juxtapose that, we sometimes intentionally don't want to land on chord tones on downbeat to create a little bit of interest, maybe a little bit of tension, and then release. This is how we build convincing eighth note lines, is by having a mix of lining up those chord tones in the right places around the downbeats, and then sometimes avoiding it, and then eventually resolving. All three of those things I played up top are great examples of this, but let's look at the Clifford Brown one specifically. We're just going to look at the first couple of bars. So as you can see, I've displayed this on the screen. It sounds like this. Now, if we think about our chord tones there, because he's playing a double time lick, we definitely want to have chord tones lining up on 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then possibly he's also maybe thinking about them landing on the ands of every beat, again, because it is a double time lick. But if we check this out with a little bit of extra information, I've labeled all the chord tones in red, and all these sort of non-chord tones that are not necessarily diatonic or sort of chromatic approaches or things like that that we're going to talk about today in blue. So as you can see, right away, chord tone on the downbeat of 1. Then we have a chord tone on the end of 2, chord tone on the downbeat of 3, chord tone on the end of 3, chord tone on the downbeat of 4. Now, there's some other little passing notes in there. That's what we're going to get into today. If we go to the next measure, you'll see again, chord tone downbeat of 1, downbeat of 2, and of 2. We do not have a chord tone on beat 3. So that's that place where he's maybe stepping outside a little bit, and then we land on a chord tone on the end of 3, and then eventually resolve to the strong chord tone of the root on the F major 7 chord. So this is a great example of chord tone timing where he intentionally lines up those chord tones mostly, but then a few times he steps outside of that to create melody, to create interest in the line, all that type of good stuff. Now, there are many ways that you can achieve these type of lines. Just taking Clifford's line and learning it in some different keys would be a great start. But if we don't want to go that direction, let's talk about two other avenues that we can go and how we practice them today. The first thing we're going to want to learn is our so-called bebop scales. To work on these bebop scales, and actually most of the stuff we're going to work on today, it is helpful to have really great command of just your basic arpeggios of seventh chords and even a little bit of knowledge of the modes. Now, I'm not somebody who teaches the modes heavily. I think it's actually a little bit of an overemphasized concept in jazz education, but having a baseline understanding is really going to help you here today. Let's start with an F dominant seventh chord and look at how this concept works. So if we just think about our regular mode that's going to go with F7, it's going to be a Mixolydian mode or a major scale with a flat 7. So let's look at this in eighth notes, and again, think about where the chord tones would line up. When we play ascending, we can see all the chord tones line up on downbeat, so that's going to make it nice and inside. What if we descend through this scale in eighth notes? Then all of our chord tones are going to sort of end up in the quote-unquote wrong location, or not on downbeats. Our bebop scales help us remedy this in sort of a very straightforward way. Instead of just having a major scale with a flat 7, we're going to have actually a flat 7 and the major 7. So in this case, it's going to be an E flat and an E natural. And that is going to sort of balance out where our chord tones land, especially if I play this ascending and then descending. So this is a bit of a shortcut in some ways to learning how to use chromaticism. What I would say is this flat 7 and major 7 sort of like little chromaticism at the top of the scale is something that many jazz musicians played. And so it's really something where we're taking this music theory and we're looking backwards at what musicians played and trying to apply a concept to it rather than thinking, oh, this is the scale I have to use. Really what is important here is understanding how this connects to chord tone timing and how it puts those chord tones in the right places. Yes, you could just play lines using the bebop scale and you would sound relatively good. But if you took this concept and thought about, can I really find other places to add chromaticism, then you're going to be able to apply it in many other different ways. And you're actually probably going to sound quite a bit better because you won't be stuck in such a box. But the bebop scale is a great way to start. So you can do this on all your dominant 7th chords. The major 7 chords have a slightly different bebop scale. Instead of having that flat 7, natural 7, they have a flat 6 and a major 6. So there's a half step between the 5th, the flat 6, and then to the major 6. And then your minor scales, I like to play them as the same way I did the dominant because they have a flat 7. So I go flat 7 to major 7 to root going up and then descending. Some people like to put that half step between the flatted 3rd and the 4th. So in the case of C minor, you would have an E flat, an E natural, and an F. That works as well, and that actually does create ideas that sound pretty idiomatic, but it kind of voids our chord tone timing because it's not going to have those chord tones lining up in the top half of the scale in the same way. So again, the concept here of chord tone timing is the important thing. Our bebop scales are just sort of how we get there. Concept number 2 that's important for us working on this sort of stuff is what we call enclosures. There are many different types of enclosures that you could employ. Basically what we're doing is we are above the note, below the note, and then landing on a chord tone. Or below the chord tone, above the chord tone, then landing on it. It's all about being on either side and then eventually resolving. That was 3 different ways I could slice enclosing that A natural on the F7 chord, kind of wrapping around the 3rd. So again, to think about labeling where our chord tones are, you can see in that first example, I eventually wanted to get to the 3rd, the A natural, so I was above it, B flat, below it to G sharp, and then I eventually resolved to it. Again, we have kind of a little tension on that when I'm outside of the chord tones, and then I eventually resolve. The next measure, very similar type of thing, but I started on a chord tone, the C, and then a couple of non-chord tones, a B flat above, and then 2 half steps below the eventual resolution note. And then the final one, I started below, went above, and then resolved. All of these are fair game. The best way to get this in your playing is through listening. There are some exercises you could do to kind of play scales with enclosures, but you really need to listen to the greats to see how they employ these, because there's a lot of variation here, and doing it in one strict way is probably not going to get you there. So try some scale exercise you can find. We're not going to dig into that too much today. You can check out the Patreon handout. There's some things on there, but that is a key concept that's got to come from listening. All right, let's dig into how we actually practice these concepts. As I mentioned, there's a fair amount of work you'll have to do to make sure arpeggios and those foundational modes or bebop scales are developed. If you haven't practiced that yet, that's where you need to start. But if you're feeling that information is under your fingers and you're maybe just not sure how to apply it, this next step we're going to do is probably where you need to be. You could look at this stuff on an entire tune. You could look at it on just one chord. Today, we're actually going to look at it in terms of 2-5-1s. We're going to use short 2-5-1s, meaning that the 2 and the 5 both happen in one measure. And we're going to only look at it in the key of B flat. So it's going to be a C minor 7 to F7 to B flat major 7. We are going to start an 8th note line on each chord tone of that C minor 7 chord. So first we're going to start on C, and then we'll start on E flat, and then we'll start on G, and then we'll start on B flat, and then do the same thing descending through the chord with our line descending. We are only going to play 8th notes, and we're going to look for places where we can add chromaticism in order to land on chord tones in the right place, and then maybe sometimes have an enclosure, have a chromatic approach note on a downbeat sometimes, again, just to kind of create that feeling of tension and then resolution. Just to talk you through an example here before we play some of these. So if we check out the screen here, you'll see I start on my C. I just go right up that scale. Again, that would be C Dorian technically. And then I have C, D, E flat to E natural to F. So I'm kind of thinking forward and hearing forward. I know that F is coming, so I'm looking for a way that I can get from that E flat to the F in a scalar fashion. In this way, you could enclose it, but I decided to use a scale, added that extra half step in there, and that's going to allow me to resolve to my F. Then I keep going, F, G, A. Now again, if I go right to B flat, that's going to be on the end of 4, which could be cool. That could be what my line wanted to be, but I want to resolve on B flat on the downbeat of 1. And so I went above to the C, back down to the B flat. So we could think that it's kind of an above approach note, or we could just think it's an enclosure, A natural to C to B flat. The exercise you would want to do is to move this through each starting chord tone. So again, we're going to start on the flat third, then start on the fifth, then start on the flat 7. We'll do these all ascending, and then we're going to do them all descending. Let's check it out. Cool, so some of those had more chromaticism than other ones. Check out the last one that I played descending. Absolutely no chromaticism in that one, right? It's just straight down the scale in the key of B flat essentially, kind of connecting the chord tones on each one of these chords, and it just works. That's a very common way of connecting the chords. It's a third, then connecting to the third, then connecting to the third. That's why it all works, because that is some of the voice leading that drives 2-5-1s. Now, if we look at the second one I played descending, that one starts on a high B flat. That one had a lot of chromaticism in it. I start in the B flat, and then I just kind of stay in the scale, chromatic passing note getting to the F, and then kind of that bebop scale sound at the top of the F part, where I'm having an F to an E natural to an E flat, and then I enclose around that third, because that's where I wanted to land. The great thing about this type of practice and this way of thinking of connecting the chord tones is that there is almost an endless amount of variation that you could do. And this is really where you want to get in your playing. Not so much that I have to just cut and paste a lick. Maybe the lick is the guide. That is what's giving you the melody in your ear, but possibly you change it a little bit. You know, you start one place, you start to hear a line going another place. Maybe you hear the rhythm section play something and then you kind of follow them. So let's just look at a few ways that we could vary these even in this very small amount of sort of harmonic space of a 2-5-1 and B flat. Let's start by looking at the one that was starting on the third of the C minor chord, ascending. So the original idea I played was this. Mostly using chromatic passing notes there. Again, these are not necessarily the notes that are in the quote-unquote bebop scale. I was looking for where I could add chromaticism that just kind of served the line and where I was trying to target to better. That's why the bebop scale is a great starting place, but it is not the end-all be-all of this type of approach. So let's think of a couple ways I could vary this. Maybe use a few more enclosures, maybe step outside of the chord a little bit. So I got sort of progressively more complicated. On the first one, I just added an enclosure around the last note. The second one, I added an enclosure around the third of both the F chord and the the B flat chord on the D. And the last one, I really played almost like a tritone substitution sound, but I'm really thinking of it in terms of that D natural that I'm arriving to. So when I go up that C chord, I'm thinking, all right, well, where can I go after that? I could resolve down to the A. Okay, I want to be a little more outside. So I'm going to choose a note in that F7 chord that's a little out, a B natural, and then I'm going to think, all right, well, how can I get to that D? It's almost like the whole thing is just an enclosure of that D, but it does let us access that tritone sub kind of sound. All right, let's check out a few where we're descending. My original idea was this. That's the one that I mentioned has all that chromaticism. What if I wanted a little less chromatic line? And then again, what if I wanted a little more kind of like outside idea, something that stretches the harmony just a little bit? Again, I'm really going for sort of a tritone sub sound there. I really land on that F sharp pretty strongly on the F7 chord. And again, that E natural D sharp to C sharp, that's all in context of where I'm going. I'm going to D, so I want to be that 2 half steps above, E to D sharp, 1 half step below C sharp, eventually resolving to D. All right, that's all we got for today. So if you're looking for some practice strategies that can get you out of sort of that like lick learning rut, if you've kind of gotten stuck there, try some of this stuff. See how you can connect chord tones using chromatic notes, using enclosures. You got to work really slow like we did today, and then speed this up into tempo. A lot of things you heard me play in that last example or last exercise really sounded like good 2-5-1 licks, and they probably should, because this is really what makes vocabulary sound convincing. So when you're taking apart something that you listen to on a transcription, or learn from a transcription, I should say, you should be looking for how that musician kind of like timed up those chord tones. When did they slip outside of the changes? When did they resolve? How can I get that in my playing, maybe in both a way that I kind of, took off the recording, but then maybe also in a more organic way where I'm just coming up with it right on the spot. All right, we'll see you in the woodshed.